I'm let's see, I've been working with these teachings, these spiritual teachings for over 40 years. I'm with the faculty of the Moria Federation, with them for over 10 years. I've been, let's see, I graduated from the Arcane School, and I've written 3 books. One's called Journey of the Soul, which this class is based on, or the vast majority of the material of everything I'm gonna cover. Written another book called Subjective Influences through this 10 seed groups or service groups. And there's a new one that I've just completed called The Glossary of Esoteric Thought. And I'm still in the final edit phases of that, but by next month, hopefully, a PDF version of the document will be available to give to you all free. And that will be posted on Makara. My thanks and gratitude to the Moria Federation tech support team, Michael Crow, Michael Stacy, for making this venue possible. Since this course is offered through the Moria Federation, please donate to them so that these classes like this can continue to be available and be offered. There will be a number of handouts. I always have a lot of handouts during my presentation, so you're going to get some. There's already 3 available that I'll be referencing throughout the course, and they'll be all available through Makara. And Michael Crow has made available 3 of the handouts in the chat. And so there's links to the actual documents that I've actually have available for this talk. And actually for two of the three documents that are available for this talk, like the terminology and the Constitution of Man, those will be referencing throughout the entire course during the next 6 months. The documents, the 3 documents so far have been translated into Vietnamese for our Vietnamese friends who are listening in. And I'm doing this on PowerPoint, so that's what you're visually going to see. And these PowerPoints and the handouts will all be available on Makara. Okay, so that covers that. So, okay, when I'm giving my presentation, the ground rules are I would like to have that everybody post their questions or comments in the chat only. And I'll be stopping periodically to address any questions you might have. And I ask that if you have any questions, please make them brief and concise. The tech staff, of course, will keep you all muted to eliminate any background noise or distraction. And for this talk, well, for most of my talks, but for this talk for sure, I'll have about 60 to 90 minutes worth of material, lecture material. Depending upon time, there'll be a alignment meditation at the end. Let's see, that covers that. For those who don't know, I mean, I know some of you already know the material, but for those who do not know, because I don't know everybody that signed up, the vast majority of the material that I'll be referencing and covering in this entire course will be found in the Alice Bailey books. And other material was taken from the Theosophical and other related sources. For those who are new to this material, like I said, Alice Bailey, she's someone who was born in the late 19th century and into the early 20th century. She was a fundamentalist Christian, and then she was contacted by a Tibetan master in the late 19-teens approximately, and she started communicating with this master. His name is Dwell Kul. We in the esoteric community know him as DK, so I'll be using the term either the Tibetan or DK throughout this course. The connection that she had with DK was a telepathic one. Now, I'm very careful to differentiate between this is not channeled material. Channeled material is where the personality of the person goes in the background and disappears, and the person is not conscious of the fact that there's somebody speaking. She was spoken to in her head through telepathy. So it was in the form of a dictation. That's why she's called an amanuensis. So she took dictation for 30 years, and it was approximately 24 books that she put together, which represent in so many ways, what we call the second dispensation of the teachings. And the first dispensation was by Helena Blavatsky when she published The Secret Doctrine in the late 1880s. And that became her seminal work. And she was supported by similar spiritual masters who live, who are human beings just as us. They just don't have physical bodies anymore. They still exist and move and have their being. They just don't have physical bodies like we do because they've gone past the cycle of rebirth. I'll probably be talking more about that later on in the course. So let me get to, oh yes, the handouts. So the 3 handouts we have this one here. It's called the 7 Planes or Human Constitution. We're going to have referencing the 3 planetary centers. That's also in, that should be available in the chat and on Makara. And also something called Terminology and Concepts. And that has some of the vocabulary that I'm going to be using basically throughout this course, not just today. Today's course is going to be basically an overview of the soul's evolution and the spiritual path. It's going to be it's general information, and then starting in November, going into March, I start getting into much more detailed information. So we're gonna talk today about understand what makes you up. We are human beings. What makes us up as human beings? And we're going to explore the human constitution, at least on a general surface level. And the human constitution is basically composed of the mental, emotional, and physical etheric bodies. The concept of working in consciousness. Well, for takeaways for the course, we're going to also, let me talk about the takeaways for the course and then get into the actual material for today. So we're going to be talking about the human constitution. That's going to come up in December. And we're going to get into the details of the mental, emotional, and physical etheric in some details, I said. We're going to be working with the concept of working in consciousness with meditation and the concept of being the observer while in meditation. That'll be in next month's talk. We're going to explore the inner world of the lower self and the higher self. I'm going to use the term higher self and soul interchangeably throughout this course. And we're also going to talk about learning to work as the observer in consciousness in meditation. We're going to learn about building thought forms and the right use of the mind. We're going to learn about some of the subjective influences in life, such as what we call the plan. I'll get into that today about what that is. I'm going to talk about the New Group of World Servers and their purpose and how their work manifests in the world. I'm going to offer to you tools and techniques for overcoming problems, thoughts, and feelings, problem thoughts and feelings. These are basically techniques based on what DK and Alice Bailey presented in one of their books, or at least a couple of their books. I'm going to be discussing what's known as the purification process. The purification process is basic to all spiritual paths. So you'll find it in Christianity and Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism. I mean, it's all over there for removing hindrances and obstructions in consciousness. And I'm going to emphasize that meditation is a primary tool in the integration process. Integration is integrating our mental, emotional, physical, known as the threefold personality, into a single unit, and then merging that with the soul so that you become that soul integrated personality. And some of the other things I'm going to be talking about, that'll be later in January and in February, setting up a spiritual practice. So let me get into today's talk specifically. Basically the evolution of the soul and consciousness. So our process as souls, although we're not fully conscious of that yet, approximately 18 million years ago, the journey of the soul began through a process called individualization. This is where man became a conscious, rational entity. The process involved imparting the spark of mind or the thinking capacity into man. In the beginning, the spark gave man the first sense of the separate I, and he existed for untold lifetimes with no particular purpose but to acquire experience and a measure of understanding about who and what he is. The spark of mind initially drove man's instinct to work with the material form or substance. And understanding the concept of the material form of substance, this is what defines us here on the lower planes, because this physical form that we have, these emotions, these thoughts, this etheric body we have that give us life from the soul, this all has a certain substance to it. And here in the dense level where we are right now, this is the densest of the substance we have to deal with. And this is what we want to transcend ultimately. And that's part of the path that we'll be talking about. So at that early stage, millions of years ago, man was spiritually undeveloped and only had physical appetites. He was animal man. Over the eons, he evolved from a strictly physical and emotional existence to where we are today. Still emotional, yes, but our minds have evolved to be capable of integrating the highest aspects of the nature with our soul, ultimately with our pure spirit, known in Eastern teachings as the monad. Now, I'm also going to use the term monad and pure spirit interchangeably. Oh, if you want to reference on your the human constitution chart, if you look at the top of the chart, you will see a large triangle there, and that shows pure spirit, and that's basically the monad. It's composed of three aspects, which is the will aspect, intelligence, and the love wisdom aspect. I'll get into more of those a little bit later. So the journey of the soul is really about completely integrating and reuniting with that pure spirit or monad with full conscious awareness to ultimately become a master of the wisdom. Generally, from the viewpoint of the aspirant or disciple, it is a path where you eventually choose to wake up and become conscious of your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions, and let go of the pulls and influences of the lower planes, which is also a discussion about the interaction of energy and matter, because our thoughts are energy and our physical form is matter. Our chakras are made of matter, and they're also made of energy too. They're a combination of the two. So ultimately, treading the path of liberation, is so you can become fully conscious soul and co-creator with the divine on earth. So we're talking about the path of liberation, and what are we liberating from? We're liberating from the limitations of the substance, the dense physical substance which we have now. And it slows us down. It keeps us from seeing clearly. It sees us from connecting with our higher selves. We basically have things called glamour and illusion. Well, these are nothing more than blockages or hindrances in our lower consciousness that keeps us from seeing that we are really connected with our higher self. So the soul defined. The soul's existence extends to the lower planes and vehicles where the physical, etheric, emotional, astral, and mental planes reside. And you can see this on your human constitution chart once again. And you see down here, well, it's hard to show you on the camera, but if you can reference it and look on planes 5, 6, and 7, basically the lower three large planes there, the bands. And those are where the vast majority of humanity exists at this point. Humanity is basically very astrally or emotionally polarized, which means that's where they come from. They come from their emotions. They do not come from their higher mind or their thought, their capacity of the soul. Prior to soul integration, which is one of our major goals, man is a separated personality. Like I say, he exists on the lower planes, the mental, emotional, and physical planes, and he has a very subjective and physical experience simultaneously. That is, the thought forms and the feelings and the interaction with the density of matter through the 5 senses. So the thought forms and the feelings are part of our subjective nature, whereas obviously the 5 senses give us more of a physical sense of our environment. And so that's how we interpret our world, and that's how we move around and connect and do what we do. So man learns and gains experience and acquires wisdom over lifetimes. He has relationships with others through work, family, romantic liaisons, and many other personal and impersonal encounters. Separated means that the mind and consciousness are almost always separated from the direct experience of the pure spirit. And we're going to get into more of the aspect of what separation means and how to overcome that. The function and purpose of the soul. A major aspect of the spiritual path is to know what is its higher purpose. To me, it's an elephant in the room. To answer this question, we have to understand that our purpose is intimately wrapped up and connected with our soul's purpose. And so what is that purpose? First and foremost, the soul's purpose is to evolve its consciousness and at one or unite with the monad. We are reminded that our pure spirit or monad is having a human experience through the personality immersed in matter. The soul acts as an intermediary between this higher spirit and the lower matter. So if we look at our human constitution chart once again, we look approximately in the middle and you'll see a small black triangle. This is all symbolic, of course. So the soul is midway between what we call the spiritual triad. The pure spirit, the monad, extended itself down as far as it could, down into the spiritual plane, the plane of the intuition, and the higher aspect of the mental plane. So that's the pure spirit. The soul between that, between man, which is on the lower planes, relates the two together. The soul relates the spiritual triad, the Atma, Buddhi, and the Manas of the planes, the spiritual plane of the the intuition and the mental planes in relation to the lower planes. So the soul relates the two together over time. But in order for that to take place, you have to have a sense of the soul. You have to know that there is a soul, and you have to have techniques and means of doing that. Over time, the spiritual path will show the spiritual seeker that his highest purpose is to be aware and conscious of the nature of the forces and energy present in his mental, emotional, and physical bodies and unite them with the soul. First of all, we take the mental, emotional, and physical, and we call that the threefold personality. Not even a connection with the soul yet. That's where the vast majority of humanity is right now. But when somebody wants to connect with their higher self, the soul in this case, there must be a means to do that, and the means is through meditation. So we must learn to connect and fuse the threefold personality with the soul to become one in consciousness. So that I, David, or whoever the spiritual seeker is, the aspirant, and they say, I am who I am, and I am a soul incarnate, and I am now connected with those higher planes, or I can connect with those higher planes through meditation. So during the process, the spiritual path, and this is over a great deal of time too. We're talking about lifetimes. This is not going to happen. You can have tremendous progress in one life, but it takes a tremendous effort on one's part to do that. So during the process, the spiritual path, you will learn to release your lower tendencies to allow the soul to show you where that you are, when integrated, you can be of service and consciously participate in the evolution for humanity. And so part of the process, a major part of the process, is waking up and not only realizing that you are a soul incarnate, the soul is coming through you, but then you can transform your consciousness and become an agent of service, a means of service. During the process of purification, the spiritual seeker must completely embrace the path and become the path itself. And this is much more later on the path, and I'm just giving you an overview here. The spiritual seeker, the aspirant, later disciple, is learning a new way of being, thinking, and feeling, and will come to understand that knowing happens directly. He learns to hold this mindset while directly connecting with the soul. This is best done in meditation. through meditating and spiritual study, which I'll get into both of those in other classes, by studying the ageless wisdom through the works of Helena Blavatsky, Alice Bailey, Torquem Saradarian, Helena, Nicholas Roerich, Patanjali, and many, many other spiritual texts and even religious books, have faculties that are awakening within you, such as discernment and discrimination in thought. So when you start connecting with your higher self, the soul says, okay, if you want to, in so many words, there isn't really a dialogue going on, but it's just simply a transformation of energy that's going on in your consciousness. So if you want to connect with the higher self, you have to clear out and purify so you can see much further within yourself. And this is done through knowledge and information that comes to you, but you need to practice discernment and discrimination and intuition. I'll be talking about these much more in detail over the course. And through these faculties and many others, you can sense your higher purpose and evolution. And over time, you will realize that there is an evolutionary process and a plan for change, that you are learning to be consciously part of it. Once connected with the soul, performing service is a natural expression toward fulfilling the soul's purpose. Now, I've mentioned the plan, or a plan. I'm going to use the term also ageless wisdom, and I believe that's part of the terminology, I think. No, maybe not. Well, ageless wisdom is somewhat of a generic term, but it basically refers to the great teachings from all the masters, from all the great teachers, all the sages, all the mystics through all the ages, and all the teachings. For example, the Eightfold Path, or the Noble Middle Path by Buddha, for example, the teachings of the Christ, teachings of Patanjali. These are all called ageless wisdom. What Blavatsky did in The Secret Doctrine, this is all ageless wisdom information, because it teaches us who we are as human beings and how to transform our consciousness over time. So the ageless wisdom teachings present an understanding that divine inspiration comes from solar and cosmic sources. This inspiration is a type of knowledge and energy that is stepped down into what is called the plan. The plan is a blueprint or energy formula expressing light, love, and the will to good for the world as a whole. In its most basic form, it is a thought form expressing three major divine aspects working out in humanity, namely will, love, and active intelligence. Now we're going to reference the three planetary centers diagram here. I'll talk about this for a moment. The teachings, the ageless wisdom teachings, this gets more into the intellectual aspect of it, but it's understanding how we fit into this world of the soul and the spirit. There's basically three major planetary centers that are governing our planet, that are causing our planet to change and go through changes, including us too. The first one is called Shambhala. This is basically the will aspect. And if you look at the top of also your your human constitution chart, you will see that the monad is made up of pure spirit. It's made up of, it's made up of will, intelligence, and love wisdom. These are the three major aspects, or the three planetary centers represented also. They overlap with each other. It'd be wonderful if I could show you a three-dimensional connection here. Then you'd be able to see the planes connected in relation to the plan, in relation to the hierarchy and how it works together, in relation to discipleship, etc. So it's all interconnected. So don't get overwhelmed. Just know that there is a plan going on here. Shambhala represents the will aspect. We call it, it's for those who don't know the rays, I'll talk about the rays very briefly shortly. The second planetary center is called hierarchy, or the ashrams, and that represents the love wisdom aspect. That's the second ray. And it actually, the hierarchy is also the custodians of the plan. So they hold the higher evolutionary plan for humanity, and they hold that in their consciousness, and they transmit that information to humanity through what we call impressions. You could call it telepathy, you can call it impressions. I'll talk about those a little bit later. And the third planetary center, going back to the planetary center diagram again, is humanity itself. And that represents the intelligence aspect represented by the third ray. Now, I mentioned that hierarchy, the second planetary center, they're custodians of the plan. And from all cultures around the world, spiritual seekers, whether they're conscious of it or not, they get ideas that come into their consciousness. And also there's another term that we use called the Nugopa world servers. And all of these spiritual seekers and people from around the world, they get ideas or impressions into their head from who knows where. They don't know where it comes from, and it doesn't matter. They get ideas that come from the hierarchy. They come from guides that give them ideas about how to practice higher values, such as goodwill, cooperation, and harmlessness through right action. Although the ideas that are transmitted to spiritual seekers is never imposed. They may be presented with information. It's just like what I'm telling you today is not imposed. You have the right to say this material feels right to me or it doesn't. You have a choice. And so you take this information and it simply says, I just got this idea. I'm going to found this new movement, Black Lives Matter, or the women's movement, or a movement to help the Society for Preventing the Cruelty to Animals, all sorts of movements that have taken place just in the last hundreds of years. For example, these all came from divine inspiration. And what these ideas, these impressions, it's the term impression. I have that also in my terminology handout. The term impression is basically just that. You get an impression, you're getting an impression of me as you see me in the image there. You're getting an impression of the tone of my voice. You're getting an impression of what do you think about what's going on in the news type of thing. These all give you ideas and impressions. These are all in your subjective nature and you interpret them. There's no judgment on how they're interpreted. That's completely up to you to do that. So we realize ultimately the spiritual seekers who become conscious of the path, they realize that they are consciously part of evolution. They eventually come to this understanding. And eventually the force of goodwill, which is one of the primary human values or the higher values that we espouse here, it will be a primary expression of what we call right human relations. This will ensure that a world order is maintained through cooperation and not by an imposed authority or a utopian dream. We've had plenty of people throughout history that want to impose their will on you, on humanity, and say, I have the way to do it, like Napoleon, for example. And he created the entire plan for controlling Europe through his military, basically, the force of his will. So we want to get past that and understand that the real master that is guiding us is our higher self. And our first higher self, as we are understanding, that's our soul. And then the soul expands, we release all sorts of blockages and hindrances, and then our minds open up and we become more clear, and we realize that our higher self expands, and it becomes ultimately the higher self, which is the monad, and the hierarchy can also be considered that too. But that's a much later, way down the path. Initially, our higher self is the soul, and the soul will guide us for practicing right human relations. So I talked about right human relations. What are they? From the book Externalization of the Hierarchy, the Tibetan master Dwell Kul says, it's right human relations is not simply goodwill, it is a product or result of goodwill and the instigator of constructive changes between individuals, communities, and nations. In essence, this is a result of practiced love and acceptance among people, groups, and nations. Okay, I think this is a good time to stop a moment and ask if there's any questions. Anybody have any questions in the chat? Where is my chat? Where are you?
No one has put any questions in the chat yet.
Nobody? Okay. I will continue then. Okay, looking at the the three planetary centers handout again, you will see that at the very top, there are 7 rays that contribute to human and planetary evolution. That's at the top there. You'll see 7 little circles up there, the 7 rays. Well, the 7 rays, this course is not about the 7 rays. That's a whole course in its own right. But I mention these only in passing as an influence. There are multiple influences which we human beings deal with all the time. We deal with influences of sound, things of light, things of intellect, things with impressions, like I say, maybe somebody's body language. These are all influences. And we're going into the subtle planes, the inner planes. Our purpose here is to acknowledge that the 7 rays, although significant, are one of the many contributing factors that influences the soul's evolution in combination with other influences from the hierarchy and the plan. So if you want to study the 7 rays, there's plenty of information in the blue books and on the Makara website. I believe on Makara, there's entire coursework on the 7 rays, but you'd have to go check that out. For briefly what the 7 rays, they demonstrate to us 7 types of qualities and qualities of force, and each has its own specific properties and attributes which affects and conditions every form from the individual to the group, all mankind and all the kingdoms. So basically all life forms on our planet are influenced by the rays. The rays influence substance, and they certainly influence our thoughts and our feelings. So
David,
go ahead.
yes, there is a request for you to speak more slowly.
No problem.
Yeah, and I think that's for the English-speaking participants, as well as An, who is translating into Vietnamese in real time.
Okay, sure. Thank you for that comment.
And many of the participants have not yet had a chance to download the documents that you're referencing.
Okay. Okay, moving along. Here's a cartoon that I got here. The dog looking in the mirror. The dog says, "My God, I'm one of those foofy little dogs." So I got this cartoon because the dog, just like the average person, has a problem discerning his true self. Now, continuing our work about preparing the path, because the person, the spiritual seeker, whether he or she is conscious of it or not, has been going through multiple incarnations, and they've had all sorts of experiences. And there is lifetimes where they start to become aware of who they are, or that there's something greater than themselves. And we'll call this preparing the path. So the spiritual work here is about how to transform consciousness, which was done long ago by the masters, namely the Buddha and the Christ and others. The Buddha and the Christ are 2 outstanding examples of human beings who still exist within our earth plane existence, although they've gone way beyond a direct experience of them. And they made the path easier through liberation as they pushed through limitations in their own consciousness, which resulted in greater vision as to what the path is and who we really are as human beings. Perhaps their greatest legacy they left us was spiritual values. And I talked a little bit about spiritual values, these being subtle energies that influence a person's behavior and affect basic morality in the fields of religion, politics, social actions, and every department of human thinking. In essence, they describe a way toward right living. And I'm going to be referencing spiritual values throughout this course. We have examples of these include cooperation, goodwill, tolerance, inclusion, sense of personal responsibility, sense of social justice, and harmlessness. There's many, many more, dozens more. Through practicing these values, spiritual seekers facilitate their own spiritual unfoldment, and it becomes a model for others. So as much as you, the spiritual seeker, embrace and take to heart the essence of inclusion, for example, or acceptance, or understanding, or cooperation, or goodwill, as much as you take these and you practice these and you're sincere about it, other people see this as an example and they start to want to model this themselves. They're attracted to this energy. And it can cause a paradigm shift in consciousness where humanity ultimately will be reoriented from a emotional reactivity to a more mental, rational understanding. This gets more of an advanced understanding about how the path moves from the emotional reactive nature that we have now, or that most of humanity has now, and where they simply says, well, I don't have to be this way in my relationship with other races or other ethnic groups, or how I relate to people in general. I can have a rational understanding instead of a reactive understanding. So in other words, this is ultimately expressing what we call love and wisdom together in all your activities and interactions. So we have a lifetime, generically speaking, we have a lifetime for a person who is awakening to the spiritual path. And if we want to use the metaphor of Alice in Wonderland, she was wandering through Wonderland. She went into a dream, and she comes across the caterpillar, and the caterpillar says to her, "Who are you?" And throughout the book, she comes across this caterpillar at different times, and he asks the question over and over, "Who are you?" And she's trying to wake up from this dream. So this is like, who are you? Who's asking this question? Well, this is the higher self which is asking this to find out who you are. And just for your own curiosity, Lewis Carroll, the author of Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, Lewis Carroll was a theosophist. So initially, when you, just like Alice, sets off on a new journey, you have a sense of who you are. Otherwise, you're confused and you have no direction to follow. So on this journey, you will frequently need to ask the question, who am I? Initially, your personality will act as a separated entity, expressing its me-ness or I-ness in all that it does. It is not integrated or so infused and is strongly identified with the lower three vehicles as it is driven by physical desires and emotional reactivity. Through something called soul urge. Soul urge is a word that I have on my vocabulary sheet here. It is the personality is spiritually waking up, and the soul is urging you through impression, through communication to you, like in a dream, or it can be even a waking thought. So that you come to a realization that you want to seek out and understand higher truths about yourself and your own nature. And as a result, you become an aspirant. You are aspiring towards something. This is the beginning of the path of liberation. After meditating for some time and through the aspirant's own expanded awareness, he eventually places himself on a path toward full cooperation with the will of God and the plan of evolution. And I'll be sharing some techniques for overcoming your personal obstacles in the mind and astral body, which keeps you from fully merging with the soul's consciousness in next month's class. So your initial goal in your spiritual work is to create what's called a soul integrated personality. And we're going to, in a meditation at the end today, we're going to have a soul alignment meditation. You first want to align your consciousness, your mental, emotional, and physical together as one unit, and then have a sense of your soul also, and integrate these together so that it becomes soul integrated. This will not happen immediately. It's going to happen over time, and then you'll establish a repetition in consciousness. So you just do it as second nature, like you breathe. You don't think about your breathing, you just simply do it. Now, I know that calling myself the soul is by no means a completed process of personal evolution, but it is a stage in a series of recognitions of the various parts of myself and how they can work harmoniously together. We're having now the hero's journey. This is a parallel in our parallel comparison in our culture. Through literature and storytelling, the path of liberation and the journey of the soul is in many ways about the hero's journey. Although Joseph Campbell stated there are 17 stages of the hero's journey, I'm going to summarize them for the sake of time into just several. The main characteristics of this journey for the hero are a call to adventure. In our case, this is a destiny that has summoned the hero and changed his spiritual center of gravity to a place unknown. We see that Siddhartha, or the Buddha, he leaves the security of the castle to venture out into an unknown world. The spiritual seeker goes on a road of trials. This is a series of tests, tasks, and ordeals that the individual must undergo to begin transformation. Emphasis here is that the spiritual seeker learns how to transcend the limitations of the thoughts and feelings in his consciousness that keep him from spiritually progressing. He learns to observe and listen with his senses, and through purification, he eventually becomes an instrument for service. I'll get into the concept of purification in a little bit. Then there's a stage called apotheosis. This is the highest point in the development of an inner spiritual process. The hero dies to the lower self to live in a higher spirit. He moves to the state of divine love, compassion, and wisdom. In the end, the hero returns to the world or home, having achieved a mastery over the higher spiritual realms and the material physical world with the newly acquired wisdom gained on his quest. In our context, he shares his wisdom with individuals and groups for the benefit of humanity as an act of service. So to tread the spiritual path, the spiritual seeker must learn to integrate the separate forces of his personality and unite or become one in consciousness with them. This will then fulfill the soul's purpose of becoming an agent of service. So you might say there are some initial goals here. And the first goal is to acknowledge the fact that I'm a human being. I got thoughts, feelings, I got problems, difficulties. Well, how can I connect with my higher self? So your first thing is to do is you want to connect with your higher self. This is done through meditation. And the soul over time will say you have to purify in order to become more clear in consciousness. And we'll get into the purification shortly. I've mentioned stages in evolution, and as you tread the path in discovering who you truly are, you must remove all hindrances and distractions that keep you from clear seeing and knowing. For you, the spiritual seeker on the path of liberation, you will go through the following stages in evolution. So the first one is called the mystical path. This is a path of devotion of a person or ideal or both. Then there's something called the probationary path, the path of purification, which is purifying anything that is not of the soul. Much later on, there's what's called the stages of discipleship, which represents a milestone for the spiritual seeker when he makes a strong commitment to the path for inner transformation. Then we have finally the path of initiation. These are rare events that happen for the individual when he is confronted with a crisis and must make a paradigm shift to a new expanded awareness. I'll discuss each of these paths in some detail separately. We'll start with the mystical path. The path of the mystic is one of aspiration and devotion to a person, ideal, or a cause. Typically, they can be found among the religious and devoted people and may remain in this state for many lifetimes. They can also be in the form of artists, poets, and architects. The primary characteristics of the mystic is this person sees the vision. They can reach the higher realms of consciousness, but not know necessarily how to describe it or return to it. and does not necessarily want to know about what it is about. The mystic is typically emotionally focused versus mentally focused. I'll talk about the difference a little later. Eventually, a lifetime will come when the mystic will want to expand his consciousness and want to know about the path. This will draw him onto the probationary path, the path of purification. This is probationary. The probationary path is probationary in the sense of how your higher self, the soul, might evaluate and guide your growth. From an esoteric viewpoint, this is undoubtedly the most difficult process to go through. In this stage, the soul desires the lower personality, which is the mental, emotional, and physical together, and his consciousness to grow and expand. We'll see the first serious steps for treading the spiritual path by beginning to demonstrate control over the basic tendencies of his emotional nature and physical cravings. Through the soul's urging, again, through impressions or dreams, the probationer might be inclined to take him or herself outside of his comfort zone and take risks, such as overcoming an addictive habit, facing a fear, in an effort to grow spiritually. This is indicative of learning responsibility and practicing self-control of thoughts, feelings, and actions, which pave the way toward preparation of greater expansions of consciousness and service. During the time of the probationary path, you'll be developing a mastery of lower tendencies, such as overcoming glamours, which is a glamour is an illusion in the astral body. It's an ongoing process, will take many lifetimes. In fact, the process of purification will go right up until the fourth initiation, which is quite a ways away for most of us. During this time, the student will be learning spiritual study and meditation, because as you come onto the spiritual path, you're attracted to new spiritual ideas and concepts. You're saying that, well, this path here feels really good for me, but there's other supplementary paths which also may want to provide information to me too, to feed my spirit, so to speak. So somebody may come from a Christian background and they read the Bible, New Testament, Old Testament, whatever, but they may say, oh, well, the teachings from the Buddha may be very relevant to me too. Or I could be learning some things from the Yoga Sutras, for example. So in spiritual study, you could be going into these too, and I'll be talking about this more later on in the course. You can be the spiritual seeker in the probationary path. He can be learning responsibility and practicing self-control of his thoughts and feelings and actions. Remember, at this stage, the person is quite reactive. He or she reacts to stimulus in his environment, but we ultimately want to move it from going toward responsive, or you're responding to people as opposed to reacting. And this has to do with a clear sense of discrimination and understanding and consciousness of who we are, and simply saying, well, I don't need to confront this energy as opposed to work with this energy or acknowledge this energy in my environment. At this time, the spiritual seeker will probably be working with meditation, which will help. The actual process of meditation will help in balancing and integrating the mind into expressing soul qualities and right thinking, which gets into the concept of reactive going toward responsive, responding to. I'll get to the importance of meditation and being the observer in November's talk. So in essence, the probationary path is a time of purification for establishing calmness in the lower vehicles and beginning to demonstrate control over the mental aspect, which is your thoughts, and determining your motives. In your emotional astral body, you're learning to control your desires, negating reactivity and your urges. In the physical, you're learning to eliminate gluttony, if that's an issue, or any cravings of drink or addictions. further into the concept of purification. Oh, maybe I can stop at this point. Does anybody have any questions? Are there any questions in the chat?
Yes, David. Jesse wanted to share a short mantra, um, one that can be used to help one become more conscious of their soulness. And what she shared is, I am the soul. I am the light divine. I am love. I am will. I am fixed design.
Well, that's great because that's also what I put on my the terminology and concepts handout that I have. It's actually 2 pages, and the other, I hope the second page came out, because on the other side of the page, there's not only the terminology and concepts one side, but affirmations and mantras on the other. And that exact mantra is also on that page too, including the great invocation too.
And then Kim asks, how much do the 4 stages overlap?
How much do they overlap? Okay, well that's a great question. I'll be talking about that later on in the course. Let's see. I think that one is later in. Okay, well they do overlap. You basically, like I say, it takes many lifetimes to go through these. It takes a lifetime, many lifetimes just to wake up to the fact that there is a path, and then you say that I want to go on the path. Oh, and by the way, I have to, in order to liberate myself on the path, I have to purify myself. And then I become aware of greater parts of myself, which is basically up in the spiritual triad, the Atma Buddhi Manas, which are part of the human constitution diagram, the higher aspect of ourself, and that gets into the stages of discipleship. So there's many lifetimes that overlap to make this entire path of liberation take place, and it is not something that happens in one lifetime. What the Buddha did 2,500 years ago was quite extraordinary, and I don't know. To me, it isn't talked about enough. But you know, how could somebody who's approximately 20-some years old, who was living a life of debauchery in the castle, then he goes outside the gates, and he says he sees suffering, and he says, "How can I deal with this when I was just doing all this other stuff with this wealth and everything inside the castle? Now I'm going to spend the rest of my life going into discovering why all this suffering took place." And he achieved what we call Buddhahood, or the Buddhists would call Buddhahood, all in one lifetime. So I've never had a decent explanation as to how somebody could achieve that in one lifetime. But basically, for our purposes and sake, we're basically talking about multiple lifetimes. But be it known and significant that it is important, the fact that we wake up and realize that we're a path on our own right through the soul with our practicing right human relations, that we can be an agent of service, that we can be alert to impressions from the higher self, the soul, and then act on that as become agents of service and become responsible for our energies, and hopefully teach this to others by our own example. So there's many different stages that go on here, as you can see, and they are not necessarily within our esoteric community here, within the Bailey teachings or this type of teaching. We talk about very specific stages. Now, you may go to other teachings which will have a parallel understanding, but we're saying basically the same thing. For a human being to go from just animal cravings and animal nature to go all the way up to become a master of the wisdom takes many lifetimes, much purification, and expansions of consciousness, which is the expansions of consciousness, which I'll be talking about over and over again too, is basically having greater recognitions in your consciousness. I recognize that there's a lot of people out there that are also working on this same path, or I recognize, I'm aware in my own realm that I'm working in my own path toward expanding places within my own consciousness too, so I can see further and greater in my own mind. I mean, it just goes on. And ultimately, I recognize I'm part of the larger group humanity. And then it goes on and on from there. So we're going toward unity consciousness. This is part of our process, but there's many, many stages to get there. To answer your question, let's see.
Another question.
Please do.
Anne Veronica asks about the difference between discernment and discrimination. In Greek, which is her native language, they're both translated as discrimination. And she writes, I know that they work on different subplanes on the mental, but I don't understand their differences.
Yeah, there are subtle differences, and they really are very similar. They are different, but very similar. And discrimination and discernment are basically faculties that develop in your consciousness, probably more like on the path of discipleship, which is past. We'll talk about that shortly, because we go to the path of probation, then to path of discipleship. But it's basically when those develop, you're expanding your consciousness, and you're able to say, oh, well, this information, this energy, this feeling, this sensitivity that I have in consciousness, it feels right to me. And I'm able to look at it mentally. I'm able to intellectualize it and also feel it. And I'm also able to intuit it. I would probably also take discernment and discrimination into working with dispassion, with your emotions, making sure that you're talking about glamour and illusion. You're talking about glamour. Like I said, it's a illusion in the astral body. So you have these feelings that come to you. They're not necessarily yours, or they could be yours, and you want to transform them. Well, you say that I can take this energy and move past it, or I can not, or choose to do it. You have a mental understanding. Next month, I will be talking about, I'll be passing out a document, a 3-page document, I believe it is, on techniques that work in consciousness. And we'll be going over some of this very ideas. But discernment and discrimination is a little bit more advanced or intermediate concept of working in consciousness with limitations. Any other questions, comments?
Just a request to slow down a little bit.
Okay.
And Jesse writes, discernment definition is the quality of being able to grasp and comprehend what is obscure.
Yes, yeah, that's good. That's good.
And then there is a question comment written in Vietnamese.
I'll pass on that one.
So I'm going to have to put that into Google Translate perhaps in order to find out what that is.
Okay, let me go on here with the path of probation, so purification, excuse me. So the probationer is, he or she is becoming aware of him or herself in consciousness. You're aware of your limitations, you're harmful, you're learning to offset harmful energies in your consciousness. You acknowledge you have biases, prejudices, bigotries, perhaps, and you're perhaps even selfishness you acknowledge, and you're replacing these with cooperation, goodwill, and harmlessness. So it's a substitution. So you're learning to do this. As a probationer, you're also learning character building. You have a new sense of responsibility, acquired responsibility. This is one of the first evidences of soul contact. And you're in this process, the purification process, you're practicing self-control over your thoughts, your feelings, and actions, which pave the way toward preparation of greater expansions of consciousness and service. And regarding character building, going a little deeper into that, you're learning self-control in your thoughts and your actions. You're learning to overcome addictions and taming a reactive nature. You're consciously taming your reactive nature. You're becoming aware of forces and energies around you and learning to responsibly work with them. You're developing a sensitivity to the inner world and higher planes, and having a general obedience to the impulses of the soul. And you possibly could be learning to trace the origin of deep anxieties, such as fears and anger, for example. And again, the time factor for integration and purification, it'll go on for lifetimes. And the probationary path is a relatively early path, but it can take lifetimes also for purification. Because, I mean, I don't want to get too involved in the vocabulary, but there's the body of the soul is called the causal body. And the soul stores memories, it stores wisdom, it stores all sorts of memories and experiences from past lives. Things that you have done in previous lifetimes are stored there. Good or bad or indifferent, or things that are needed wisdom to overcome. And those are stored in your causal body. And they can come up during your lifetime because the soul says, I want to purify this. And so that can take lifetimes. And as you become more conscious in your mind and your feeling nature, as much as you're bringing in through meditation, you're connecting with the higher planes. For example, you're bringing in more intuition from the spiritual triad, and you're learning to replace. A key concept to understand here for purification is that later on during your meditations, you're actually connecting with the soul, which connects with the higher planes. And the soul transforms that energy and brings that energy from the higher planes through itself to your lower mind or astral body. In other words, your astral body, for example, your emotional body is being transformed with higher rationality, higher wisdom, higher understanding, intuition. These are things that are replacing your reactive nature. And this takes place over time. And in the initial phases of the probationary path, you may see some changes relatively quickly, but when you get onto the path of discipleship, which I'll talk about shortly, you become more conscious and have techniques to overcome things directly. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. The probationary path ends approximately with what's called the first initiation. The first initiation has to do with the birth of love for humanity in the heart. So I'm going to talk about the initiations in the March class. So I don't want to focus too much on those right now, but basically initiation is it's a form of purification where your mind has expanded to the point of where a certain amount of soul infusion has taken place. So the soul has entered your consciousness and purified your being to a certain point. That's really and it's expanded your heart and your mind. So there's much more to say about that, but initially let's hold it at that. Okay, the path of discipleship, or esotericism it's also called. On the probationary path, the probationer has begun the purification process of his lower threefold nature. The aspirant, the one who aspires, will continue the purification process, but he will learn to willfully control his aberrant energies. He's still pulled by forces and energies such as anger, desire, and selfishness, which are difficult to control and often have an unknown and deep-seated origin. And he's learning to stabilize these energies in his consciousness. Note here, up until the third initiation, the individual is astrally polarized, not mentally. So astrally polarized, meaning that's the polarization means that's the place in your being of where you're coming from. In this case, you're coming from an emotional reactivity towards something versus a mental responding toward understanding. And this really this full purification doesn't take place until what is called the third initiation. And so the personality, the mental, emotional, physical, has many personal drives to offset. On the path of discipleship, the individual will take a more serious tone and is committed toward deepening his or her spiritual work of soul integration. Note that the disciple must muster his courage and face and transform his own lower energies. So if I've got anger in me, I have to deal with that myself ultimately and transform that energy into love or cooperation and goodwill. If I have bigotry or selfishness or biases or whatever, those have to be transformed too, because that is not who we are as human beings. That's how we react, but we want to get past that and start to respond and understand who we are. The disciple's personality is evolving, as I said, and continuing into a new and wider field of awareness, relationships, responsibilities, and influence. So the disciple at this point, you're basically moving from a more beginner level to an intermediate level in consciousness, and you're probably using meditation or some type of being quiet or still within yourself, perhaps contemplation, you might call it. And you're starting to look at yourself through more of a mental understanding. And you're seeing yourself, what says, you may have like an evening review. And I talk about this in the January talk in the spiritual study, for example. But you may look at yourself at the end of the day or in the morning when you do your meditation, whatever you do, however your process is. And you may look at yourself and say, well, how do I, David, work with other people? How is my energy felt with them? Or how is their energy felt to me, etc. And so it's becoming aware of who you are and how you express in the world or how you take in energies too. So again, the disciple's life is characterized by a shift from an emotionally focused polarity in the mind of the personality to a mental, mindful focus. And at this stage, a considerable measure of control is established over the emotional and reactionary tendencies. And again, I was emphasizing the concept of meditation and allowing the buddhi, or the energy from the spiritual triad. If you look on your human constitution chart, you'll see that that's the plane number 4 of the intuition. And that's where buddhi comes from, the energy of buddhi. That's that higher expression of our pure spirit that's manifested down that the soul connects with. And we, in meditation, particularly at this more intermediate level as a disciple, you're learning to embrace this energy and pull it forward, and comes in through in your consciousness. Now, you don't necessarily intellectually saying, oh, well, that's buddhi energy and here it comes and it's going to transform me. You don't have it that way. You more like start to feel and literally develop your intuition for knowing that this energy is present. Your mind becomes much more clear, and your thought process becomes more rational as opposed to irrational. In the stages of discipleship, DK, the Tibetan master, he enumerates 6 distinct stages in attainment that culminate in expansions of consciousness. And I'll talk about these in detail. I'm not sure where in the course I'm talking about those. I think it's in the March class, but I'll have to look again. But just know for the time being, you'll get a handout for those, that there is those 6 different stages, and they graduate from a more beginner stage up to a much more advanced stage where you're actually working with a master or a senior initiate on the inner planes. Okay, we're talking about purification also. This is over an overlap here. The major spiritual goal for the disciple is what's called the second initiation, as he is learning to willfully control all of his lower desires and tendencies. Now, this is up until when the person takes the first initiation, as I mentioned, These, like I said, these are rare events. And so you move and sort of come into these events and you become them. So the first initiation is opening the heart, opening to the heart, opening up to the Christ consciousness, as we call it, or the Christ principle, where you're basically loving other people, you're loving humanity, and you're much more open to people and situations and group consciousness. At the first initiation, the master and the ashram take note that you're doing this and you're on this path. In the second initiation, the master is definitely, there's like senior guides that are working with you on the inner planes, and you don't necessarily know it, or you may know it. In my personal case, I know that I have guides because I have pitches and tones that are in my consciousness at different times, in my waking consciousness and also during my meditation time. They can come at any time, even while I'm driving a car, I can get these tones. So I know something, someone, or some consciousness is present. That's how I personally work. I have also had guides that have actually spoken to me as I'm speaking words right now. So this has actually happened for me. So I don't know what your process is. There's 7.8 billion souls out there, so everybody has a little bit of a different process. But just know at this stage of purification, on the second initiation, and these stages of discipleship, you're basically going through all sorts of purifications. You're expanding your awareness. You're having greater recognitions in consciousness. And so the masters are taking note. So then what we do is we're moving toward the higher initiations. And so what we have to go through a process of embracing crisis. Now, you've been going through crisis through lifetimes and lifetimes, and but this is more of a spiritual crisis, literally in your consciousness. It doesn't happen to anybody else. It happens only to you personally, and it happens at a particular time because you are, quote, ready for it. So as somebody once said, and I have no idea who said this, if you don't have a crisis in your life, find one. Well, it's sort of like a tongue-in-cheek comment, but it sounds counterintuitive, but we typically want to find peace in our lives and not a crisis. In reality, the disciple does not go looking for a crisis, but he attracts it to himself via the soul as something he must overcome and transform within himself. So at this advanced stage, because we're right on the edge here of a higher initiation, we've already taken the second initiation here, and you're moving toward the third very rapidly, because once you get to that level of consciousness, then you're really starting to move much faster in transformation. And you'll simply say, it's really time for me to move past these problems that have been haunting me. And you could be aware of a certain anger that you might have that you want to get past. It's been holding you back for, perhaps in this lifetime, perhaps even other lifetimes too, but it's like it's here now, it's in your consciousness, and you need to deal with it. You may have used techniques before and it hasn't worked, but now you've really got to face it and deal with it. So before talking about the esoteric concept of initiation, going specifically into it, I want to first look at some of the definitions of crisis borrowed from the one of the free dictionaries on the internet. The word crisis, a crucial or decisive point or situation, a turning point. These are some of the definitions on crisis. An unstable condition, as in a political, social, or economic affairs involving an impending, abrupt, or decisive change. A point in a story or drama when a conflict reaches its highest tension and must be resolved. For our discussion, we will pay particular attention to the words decisive point or situation, unstable condition, or a conflict that reaches its highest tension and must be resolved. So when we're talking about crisis, initiation, discipleship, purification, etc., we're talking about crisis in your life. Did you actually learn from the crisis? And as you probably know of your own personal crises that you've had over your lifetime, you will be tested to sink in the experience and the knowledge in consciousness of what you've learned. You had to learn some things the hard way, as I did, other people have, or you learn things much easier. Whatever it is, you sink in the knowledge. It becomes part of your consciousness, part of your being and understanding. So the more that you're able to sink in, that's S-Y-N-C-H, you sink in the knowledge and the wisdom, you take it to heart and mind and thought, the positive result will be more soul radiance from the learned experience that was stored, and then it will be stored in your being. I don't know if I put this in the terminology or not. Well, what happens is there's the knowledge that you sink in, it becomes a form of wisdom. It's something that you learn. It's something that you can practice. It affects your thoughts. It affects your physical way of being, your expression of will, your expression of thought and action. These are what we call wisdom, and it's learned and it's stored in our causal body. And then the soul says, yes, this is what I want. I want to transform this energy and become this higher energy. So we have the causal body, the body of the soul, is the storehouse of wisdom accumulated over lifetimes. And not to get too technical, but it actually is technical, there's something called permanent atoms. If you look at the human constitution chart, you will notice that there's permanent atoms on planes 3 through 7. And they are at the highest, they're at the first subplane. Okay, each one of these planes has 7 subplanes within them. And at the top subplane of each one of those is a permanent atom. And so anyhow, that knowledge is somehow that wisdom, that learned wisdom, whether it's astral, emotional, or some action that you did in your life and you learned from it really deep on a deep level, that's stored in your permanent atoms in the causal body. That's about as much as I'm going to say on that, because that gets way more technical than we need to here. But you get the idea that the higher self, the soul, says, well, I'm on this path of evolution, liberation, and I need to learn from this particular situation. And here's the situation. I'm creating a crisis in the personality's life. And can the personality move through it and learn from it? So this is a major spiritual goal in a lifetime. And it's up to you to discern, to figure out what that particular crisis is for you personally. Humanity, I mean, the United States has a crisis going on right now in the political situation. We have crisis around the world in the pandemic. We have a crisis around the world in the climate crisis. We have a crisis around the world of the concept of unity and the principle of sharing, trying to understand and adopt those concepts. So we have these multiple crises that are happening simultaneously in our world. And we're trying to absorb these as a humanity as a whole, but obviously we're not there yet. We're not that far away, but at the same time, we're very far away. We just have to have help to do that. And you are part of the help as much as you expand your consciousness and become part of the solution. Okay, I'm going to stop there for a moment and ask if there's any questions or comments anybody has.
And we do have a number of comments, questions, beginning going back to what is the difference between discernment and discrimination. And Jesse shared from the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, discernment being the quality of being able to grasp and comprehend what is obscure,
Right.
and discrimination being the act of making distinctions between human beings based on the groups, classes, or other categories to which they are perceived to belong.
Okay, that's I like those, but I want to keep it. I want to make this. I want to make this discussion as practical as I can, but it's also esoteric at the same time. So when we talk about how we respond or react, or we practice connections of other people, that's becoming much more practical for us personally, and how we interact with other people through my emotions, or through my thoughts, or through my actions, or through my expression of will. So these have extremely practical applications in the world, and you are part of this. You are part of that happening in the world. You're part of those 7.8 billion souls out there making life happen on our planet. Um, some other questions, please.
Yes, I did get the Google Translate from Tui Hoang Pham,
Sure.
and the question, for an ordinary person without any extraordinary impact, how many lives will it normally take to purify the ego? How many lives to step on the path, prepare for the path of discipleship?
It depends entirely on the individual soul. We are, the soul determines who our parents are. And so we are born into this life, into this culture, into this race, into this culture, this ethnic group, whatever country, and for whatever purpose the soul has. And the soul, I mean, my personal belief is that we have maybe one or two or even three major things that we have to overcome in a lifetime. You know, transforming, maybe I have a level of selfishness I have to get over, or maybe I have male-female relationship energies I have to transform. And this can take in this lifetime, the soul says, okay, we're going to work on this, and then we're going to continue to work on it in the next life, and we're going to put you in contact with this group. I mean, this is all subtle stuff that the soul arranges behind the scenes that we may or may not be even aware of, but it happens to us. And I would probably say majority of us are not aware of this dynamic at all, but we still go through it, and we still are transformed because of it, or we attempt to transform and we go through our crises. And so it can take many, many lifetimes. It just depends on the individual and what he or she must overcome to expand his or her consciousness.
And then Kim asked you to repeat the other name that you mentioned for the path of discipleship.
Well, we're talking about the stages of discipleship, which are 6 distinct stages. Those are talked about in, I believe, I'm thinking they're in Discipleship in New Age, but I can't remember for sure, but that doesn't matter because you're going to get a copy of that anyhow. These stages are basically, they're very esoterically described and understood, and they parallel other teachings and religious understandings, and they don't, you know, they're specific. These particular terminology is specific to this particular philosophy and understanding. So there's many different ways. There's the path of initiation, there's the path of discipleship, and the path of the mystic. And these are terms that DK, the Tibetan master, has articulated in his books. And that's basically where I'm coming from with those. Next, Michael.
Okay. Jesse writes, a major crisis for the disciple is called the dark night of the soul.
Oh, yes, yes. This is basically, this is probably a much more advanced initiation period in a initiate or a disciple's life, nearing the end of their process, which is basically several lifetimes left in their purification or liberation. But basically, the dark night of the soul is referring to facing what's called the dweller in the threshold. It's a term that I believe that it was first used back in the early 19th century by Bulwer Lytton, I think, in Zanoni, the book Zanoni. Anyhow, it refers to facing that a completeness of your lower self, all of your hate, your anxieties, your biases, your bigotries, your selfishness, your hatred, all the dark part of yourself, and then the higher self merges together in what's called the angel of the presence. Those two come together willfully in consciousness, and they're merged together. And this is basically at the third or the fourth initiation, probably the fourth initiation, which is a very advanced stage in which most people we have no idea about this yet. It's where you finally purify your being and allow full soul integration to come into your consciousness. That's another point to bring up too with the initiations. When we say like the first initiation, that means 25%, these are what DK told us, these percentages, 25% of your being, basically of your consciousness, is purified with soul energy. When you get through the second initiation, the purification, it's basically 50%. When you get to the third initiation, the third initiation, you'll be up to 75%. And the fourth initiation is where you completely destroy the causal body, and you no longer have to participate in the cycle of rebirth, and you purified all your karma. So we're obviously not there yet. We're aspiring towards that, but there's a lot of purification has to be done. But basically, that's the dark night of the soul, is really facing the really dark parts of yourself and then uniting in consciousness the higher aspect of yourself with that darkness and bringing light into the darkness so that they merge together as one.
There's many more. Kim shares, most of us probably have experienced some sort of crisis in our lifetime. What exactly is a crisis? In Chinese, the term consists of two words, wei ji. The first word, wei, means danger, damage, disaster. The second word, ji, means opportunity, timeliness, synchronicity, potential. Put together, the two words mean a dangerous or disastrous situation that activates the potential for change.
Well, a crisis, if you have a crisis in your life, maybe you've, let's see, I'm trying to think of a crisis that many can relate to. I suppose you could talk about if you have children, then you're worried about your child is in danger, perhaps going, well, I won't say going to school and facing kids that have guns or whatever type thing, but you're worried about the health and safety of your child. If you have, we can talk about the pandemic, we can talk about COVID, we can talk about how people that have pre-existing conditions, and some people are afraid to go to even going shopping. They have to go through a crisis in themselves. It may not be, this may not be strong enough actually, because what we're talking about here is a real deep spiritual crisis, which is really facing base angers and base desires and cravings and prejudices and bigotries and selfishness. These are really the crises we're talking about. Going to the store and shopping for your groceries it can be a feeling of fear and anxiety for somebody, which creates a crisis. But we're talking about a much deeper level crisis here, which is something that affects you over a lifetime, or lifetimes plural. So this is really what the type of crisis we're talking about here. Yes, it can be danger. It can be a person. It can be a person teaching him or herself to get past a fear in public speaking. That can represent a tremendous crisis. For example, Joe Biden, the presidential candidate, he was a stammerer from early childhood. He stammered, and he had to teach himself to become a public speaker. So he put himself out there and taught himself. I don't know the exact dynamics he did that, but he literally took him through a spiritual crisis to do this, because he had to face his fears. So this is sort of the idea we're talking about. That was dangerous to him. When you have a fear, I'm going out there and I'm going to be fearful of all these people. It's irrational, of course, but still I'm going to face the fear, and then I get over it and I move past it. So this is also the dark night of the soul, your dark night of the soul of the fear. So these things are all interconnected with the purification process. Go ahead.
And let's see. Kim wants everyone to know that the definitions that she shared was from her teacher, Yongzi. And Yvonne provides two suggestions for what may constitute crises, one being divorce and another being death. And Jesse writes, DNOS, accepting the monster within and one's own death.
Okay. Yeah, like somebody may have a fear of swimming or going in the water because, and they could have that from childhood, and they probably picked it up from a past life and it carried into this life. So that could become a tremendous crisis for that person if they are forced to go into a situation where there's water, a swimming pool, going into a river or a lake or whatever. And it's like they're being forced into it. That can be a problem. So it's crisis is, when I talk about this during this course, crisis, I'm really talking about on a deep esoteric level. And certainly I can't diminish the fact that you have crises in your life. Each one of us have that. I've had multiple crises in my life, and I've had transformations too. And each one of you have had that too. You've had crises around being a woman or being a man or being a child or being around bullies. I mean, around being people shouting racial epithets at you because of your color of your skin or because of your race or your ethnic group, or you're afraid of walking on the street at night. These are all, they may be irrational, but they can be crises, and it's something you have to face, or you don't have to face it. You can put it off, but eventually you'll probably want to face it so you can move on and expand your awareness and not be fearful. Because with crises, there's usually some type of fear and anger involved with it. And for us working on the spiritual path, anger and fear are two energies that we need to overcome. And we can acknowledge we have anger, and we will have anger. And we can have those probably higher into the higher initiations. Although I haven't been there yet, I'm still aspiring myself. But the point is that we learn to contain these energies and not let them drive us, and not let them control us in a reactive way. And unfortunately, the headlines that we see in the world today, we see that reactivity is the name of the game, and that's not who we are and what we aspire to become here. And we're working to expand our awareness. We're here to expand our minds and consciousness and help others along the way too. Any other questions?
I think I got them all for now.
Okay. Okay, so we've gotten there. Okay, so now the actual path of initiation, so immersion in crisis. So like I say, we've had the stages before. We had the path of the mystic, then we had the path of the probationer, which overlaps into the stages of discipleship. And discipleship, the stages of discipleship has, in this philosophy or this teaching, we're talking about six distinct stages in discipleship, which are much more advanced levels of awareness, expansions of consciousness. And the final stage of the spiritual path is called the path of initiation. Now, I briefly described what the first and second initiations are, but I should probably get into this point here. As a parallel note on initiation, many esoteric orders, from the ancient Egyptians to the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons, have ceremonies and initiations. But initiation of what or into what? Well, it's basically into a new understanding or expansion of our true self. Any type of growth for the individual can be also applied toward the group as an individual or a corporation or even a nation. So the entity called the United States is going through a shift in consciousness. The entity called the European Union is going through a consciousness shift too. They see themselves as one, but yet they are not one. They're fractured. And so they're merging or wanting to merge and move toward unity consciousness. And so we are with the United States. We have united right in our name. So we have a stress and we have a tension about what this means. Initiation is a process of growth where a new orientation towards the world, both inner and outer, has taken place. That's inner in our consciousness, and our outer world is taking place. So initiation is another word for evolution of the small self. That's the lower self, the mental, emotional, physical, and integrating with the large self, which is the higher self, the soul integrated personality. So we see ourselves as separate, mental, emotional, physical. We merge with the soul, become soul integrated. And then what we do is we merge ultimately with the Atma, Buddhi, and the Manas, which you see there is the expression of the spiritual triad on your human constitution chart. So that is our long-term spiritual goal, is to completely merge with the spiritual triad. So by doing this, what we do, we shift our perception of reality, and we have a new level of insight and understanding. And as I mentioned, there's 4 major initiations before becoming a master of the wisdom. And the first 3 initiations relate to overcoming major obstacles, as I mentioned. Again, the first initiation is about dealing with physical cravings and addictions, and the birth of the Christ in the heart takes place. The second initiation, we have the emotional passions are willfully neutralized. And I'm going to be talking about the first and second initiations in more detail in the last class in March. The third initiation, again, the initiate is limiting any separative tendencies in the mind. This means he has shifted from an astral to a mental polarization. So he becomes responsive as opposed to reactive. He has a vision of the plan. There is the divine plan. There is this great energy formula or blueprint, as you will, of the spiritual hierarchy. We go back to our 3 planetary centers diagram, and we see that the hierarchy, which is located there at the second planetary center, they are the custodians of the plan. They hold this plan of expanding our awareness. So we ultimately are moving toward oneness in humanity. On much higher levels of consciousness beyond our abilities right at the moment, we are already one in consciousness, but we just don't realize it on our level here. And that's what we're moving towards becoming. At the third initiation, the disciple initiate is infused with the light of the pure spirit or the monad. He or she sees the plan in its entirety, or at least has a glimpse of it. This initiation is also called the transfiguration. This marks the first time the personality of the disciple can make a direct connection with the monad or pure spirit. At the fourth initiation, called the renunciation, these are just names that the Tibetan Dwell Kul assigned to these initiations. The initiate personality is now directly connected or at one with the energies of the spiritual triad. They completely permeate the brain, the mind, and the lower threefold vehicles. There's a complete release of all attachments to the form life at the fourth initiation. So everything in your consciousness, basically, that you have attachments on the physical plane, and probably also with emotional attachments, those would all probably be falling away because they represent connection with this world, or I should say, this level of consciousness, because you've now passed into a much higher level of consciousness, much more expansive, where you're moving away from the physical plane reality and even living in this world anymore. You have a complete release of all attachments to the form life. The cycle of rebirth is complete and the causal body is destroyed. The causal body, as you remember, is that body, or that it's the body of the soul, which stores all the wisdom and experiences in karma. So the karma is being completely burned out or purified, and you literally don't have to be here in physical form anymore unless at your higher level of consciousness you want to be. And often the entities that choose to come back as guides are just doing that. They are basically guides to help humanity, help individuals or groups evolve and move toward the next level. And at this last stage, the monad or pure spirit, you're now at the fourth level initiate. You are now ready to become a master of all 7 planes. This is the human constitution. You're now becoming a master of those 7 planes, and you can choose to contact the lower worlds in service at will, or not. You can move on because you're moving toward becoming a master of the wisdom. There's another phase that takes place after the 4th initiation before become a master. I don't know what that is. I don't remember, but suffice it to say, it's beyond our ability right at the moment. So let's see. So I'm basically concluding my talk today because I basically have talked about the journey of the soul and evolution of consciousness. So when you actually are talking about the journey of the soul and evolution in consciousness and the path of liberation, they're basically very, very similar, and they overlap with each other. And it has really to do with a transformation in consciousness. What you encounter on the spiritual path, you are dealing with problem energies and purifying your own consciousness. So a key theme that, one of the key themes that I want to emphasize in this entire course is the concept of meditating, of course, and the concept of merging the threefold personality with the soul and creating what we call an at-one-ment, or a personality integration. And of course, purification, that has to be continual and ongoing. A major concept to grasp, which a little bit more advanced, is the idea, like I said, is buddhi, the energy from the plane of the intuition. It is, as you meditate and go deeper into your meditations and your purifications, you are allowing ultimately the buddhi energy. The buddhi energy represents pure reason, pure love. It's without thought. It's pure beingness. And you're allowing this energy to transform your lower astral, emotional, reactive nature. So this will take place over a long period of time. This will not happen. It quite possibly will take a number of lifetimes for that to take place. And during that time, there's stages of discipleship taking place. There's initiations going on. And this is some of the major themes that I would like to emphasize in this entire course. And of course, during this entire process, this journey of the soul and the evolution of consciousness, you're seeing yourself as you are, not as who you think you are, or what some many of the teachings around the world, whether Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, or whatever, they teach you to go within and meditate, or perhaps they may even teach you to be in prayer work. This is great, but do they tell you exactly who you are and what you are as a human being? Well, that's part of your spiritual study. That's part of your discernment. That's part of your direct experience. And I'll go more into this in the next class in November. And of course, a major theme throughout this entire process of evolution of consciousness is the process of service. Because as much as you expand your consciousness, then you'll want to go out into the world. Perhaps it's only with your family. Perhaps it's only with your significant other. Perhaps it's with your own cat or dog, or maybe it's with your community. Maybe you get into politics or something and you represent a constituency, whatever. Your level of service expands and you want to go out there and, quote, make things better from a higher viewpoint, from your viewpoint. That's basically all I have for today. Obviously quite a bit. For my next talk in November, I'll be specifically talking about meditation and becoming the observer. Now, if you didn't grasp everything that I'd said here, this is all going to be posted on Makara, and you can review my notes, and this will help refresh the mind and understanding. So are there any, we can have an alignment meditation shortly, but are there any questions or comments first?
There are no specific questions, comments. For instance, Tia writes, amazing class, unbelievable how much information presented. Thank you, with 5 exclamation points. And Kim writes, fantastic, thanks. So we got those kinds of things.
I appreciate that. But remember, it's you who have to do the work. So let's go into a brief alignment meditation. Let's, whatever your process is, keep your eyes open or close your eyes, whatever's comfortable, and take 2 or 3 deep breaths. And release all tensions and just be in the moment the best you can. And have a sense of your mental part of yourself. We call this the mental body, or the emotional body, or the physical body. Have a sense of these 3 parts of yourself. Just acknowledge you're there, and now pull these together as one unit. As you're looking in consciousness, as you're listening in consciousness, as you're seeing in consciousness, just have a sense of your mental and emotional and physical self all functioning as one unit together and not separate. Now with a sense of oneness in your lower vehicles, in your lower bodies, sense your higher self, sense that greater part of yourself. Now with these two energies, your threefold personality, your mental, emotional, physical, the threefold personality, merge that with your higher self, the soul. Merge them together until they are all one together. And now we will take the mantra that somebody brought up from the early part of the class. I am the soul. I am the light divine. I am will. I am love. I am fixed design. As much as you're able to merge these energies together and become one, remember what it feels like. Feel it in consciousness. Feel it in your thoughts. Feel it in your astral body. Maybe you feel it physically too, in your etheric body also. And you have a knowingness about it also. This is my true self. When you are ready, return to consciousness. Any final sharing by anybody?
Just a continuation of thanks and so forth. And then
Okay.
there's a question from Kim. What is meant by fixed design?
Fixed design. I believe this particular mantra or affirmation came from, what was his name? Norman Stevens back in the 1980s. I'm just guessing. I think this is who it's from with the Rainbow Bridge Project. Somebody may correct me on this, but he basically prescribed a particular type of meditation and understanding as knowingness, where I really know that my higher self has a particular structure and makeup. My higher self, like I said, the higher self is at first the soul, and then later on, when you expand your awareness, the higher self goes into the spiritual triad. And so those are all a fixed design. They're all static as they are, because they're basically an outpouring of the pure self of the monad. So that's my understanding about what fixed design here would mean. So it's aligning with that pure essence and structure that we truly are. I'm going to go more into this in much more detail in November. So, which leads me to say that our next talk, I think, is on November 12th, I believe. Yes, November 12th. And we'll be talking specifically about meditation and the role of the observer in consciousness. So I think that's going to be in my mind, it's a pivotal understanding of the spiritual teachings and the esoteric path. I hope you'll find it the same way too.
And a question, do you have a website?
No, I have not created a website yet. My three books, well, excuse me, my first two books, The Soul Source, of which this course is based on, and the other one is the Subjective Influences through the 10 Seed Groups. Both of those are available on Amazon.
Jesse shares, as with all things esoteric, has many meanings based on one's level of understanding. And more thank yous, thoughtful presentation, exciting journey of 6 months.
Yes, it's quite a journey. So everybody, I hope you stay safe. And for those in the United States, please vote. And I'll look forward to seeing you on November 12th at the same time.
And thank you to everyone. I'm going to stop the recording now.
Yes.
It will be put up on Makara, perhaps including a recording of the Vietnamese translation, if we're able to get that recording to us.
All right. So everybody, thank you.